I'm a high school teacher here in Christchurch. What are the best ways in which I can stand up against woke ideology without being cancelled? Only 35 people voted for that, but I think it was pretty popular by the sounds of it.
Yeah, it does, yeah. Yeah, you know, by the time you find yourself in a situation like that, where that question becomes particularly germane, you probably already made 1,000 mistakes. So, you know, one of the things I observed at the University of Toronto when I worked there is I could see this woke nonsense emerging over decades. I really started to see it when I was at McGill University in the 90s with the encroachment of ethics committees on the research enterprise. And I could just see it just doing this like this year after year. And I could see it when I was a graduate student. And I went to Harvard after I was at McGill, and it was pretty under control there in the 90s when I was there. The psychology department there was, the people there were pretty damn tough. And they were in charge, like the adults. And a lot of them really were adults, and they were smart people. We met some remarkable people there. And then I went to the University of Toronto, and it wasn't the same caliber as Harvard. And unsurprisingly, because Harvard's a very high caliber university. And then I would observe my faculty colleagues retreating. So the administration, which has ballooned out of control over the last 30 years in universities, would just incrementally move forward with increasingly intrusive demands. Each demand being rather small demand, but the sum total of all the demands was not small. And I had many minor altercations with my colleagues at faculty meetings, pointing out that this was happening and saying, well, are we going to say no? So the university would say, well, you have these fourth-year seminars, they only have 15 people in them. We have a staff shortage, faculty shortage. Can you double the size of the seminar? And my response to that was, well, how about you hire some more faculty members and a few fewer people on the administrative side? How would that be for a solution? And then I tried to get data, and the data question was, how many administrators have you hired in the last 10 years compared to faculty members as the student population has grown? And I never did get that data from the University of Toronto, but we know it broadly speaking for universities, and the answer is there's more students, there's no more faculty members, like there's more students than there were 20 years ago. There are no more faculty members, and there's way more people on the administrative front. And so, but the answer to my colleagues was, that my colleagues always delivered was, well, you know, does it really make that much difference if we double the size of our seminars? And the answer is, well, yes, if the seminars are valuable and the interpersonal time you're spending with the students is necessary and the whole enterprise is credible, because these students have worked for 4 years and they're usually at the top of their academic heat by the time they get into fourth-year seminars, and they need the attention. And now you're going to dilute it by a factor of 2, and that means that if the seminars were worthwhile to begin with, then yes, you're compromising them. So yes, actually it does matter if the whole enterprise matters. But then, if I was rude enough to point that out, the response was often, well, if we don't do what the administration wants, they won't give us what we want. And my observation was, and I used to say this, have you noticed that they're not giving you what you want anyway? And then that was usually when I was hushed up in a variety of ways and we moved to the next topic. And so I watched my colleagues take micro-retreat 5,000 times. And then by the end of that, they were in a situation where they had to ask a question like, well, what do we do to not be canceled by the woke mob? And the answer was, don't let the woke mob form. Well, it has formed. It's like, yeah, it has. It's a little late now. Now you're paying the price for all that avoidance, which we just talked about in the first part of this discussion. And so, you know when you quell what you have to say, right? And you experience an inner disquiet, you think, I have something to say, but I'm afraid to say it. It's like, fair enough. How afraid are you not to say it? People have complimented me on my bravery, which is something I'm not particularly comfortable with, because I don't think it's the right way of thinking about it. It's not how I think about it. I think, no, I'm just afraid of the right thing. It's not that I'm brave. I'm way more afraid of not saying what I have to say than I am of saying it. And the consequences of saying what I have had to say have been dramatic and sometimes very painful, and also extremely rewarding, both of those at the same time. But I know perfectly well what the consequence of not saying what you have to say is, because I studied totalitarianism for 40 years. And in a totalitarian state, no one ever says what they have to say. You know, we have this theory about totalitarianism. It's sort of the theory we have about Putin right now. It's like there's a lot of innocent Russians, and there's Putin. He's the tyrant, and all these innocent Russians are the victims of the tyrant, and that's a totalitarian state. And there's some truth in that, because power structures get extraordinarily warped and punitive in totalitarian states, but it's a completely preposterous model of totalitarianism. The reason that totalitarianism is total is because everyone in a totalitarian state lies about absolutely everything all the time to everyone, to themselves, to their wife or husband, to their children, to the other members of their family, to their friends, to their colleagues. It's the old Russian joke. They pretend to pay us, and we pretend to work. Yeah, ha ha. Ha ha, till everyone starves. Very funny. And you think, well, does everybody really lie all the time in a totalitarian state? And if you ask that question, the first proper response to that is, you wouldn't ask that question if you knew anything at all about what you were talking about, because the evidence is pretty damn clear. In places like East Germany, we went and visited, Tammy and I, when we were in Berlin, we had this very interesting day. We went and visited the museum of the Stasi, that's secret police in East Germany. And the Germans are pretty damn efficient. When they go in for the whole secret police thing, they do it in that hyper-efficient German way. And so we went to this complex of administrative buildings that was quite large and walked through these 1970s offices where the Stasi operated. And it was a huge complex, huge prison-like complex. And it was run by this guy who was a dissident in East Germany when he was 17, who was arrested and put in there for a year, along with his girlfriend, who they tortured in front of him. And now he runs the whole museum, so that was his life. And this bureaucratic infrastructure, hyper-developed in the Germanic way, was only part of the Stasi network in Eastern Germany. There were huge buildings devoted to the secret police all over Germany. Why? Well, 1/3 of the Eastern Germans were government informers. 1/3. So that means if you had a family of 6 people, 2 of them were informing to the government. And so what did that mean exactly? Well, it meant they listened to everything you said. And then if you ever said anything that would be displeasing to everyone else who was lying 100% of the time, which would really mean anything that was ever true, even remotely, then you could be reported for that. And that wouldn't go very well for you, let's say. But also, if you were the person who did the reporting, well, then you'd get a reward. You know, it was very common in the Soviet Union, where there was a terrible shortage of apartments and people were crammed into these small living areas. Because how much space does someone need, after all? when there's more important things to be concerned with. And one of the most effective ways to get a new apartment would be just to denounce your neighbor down the hall and get them sent off to the gulag, kicking and screaming at 3 o'clock in the morning in front of their family, stripped naked, so they couldn't struggle to, effectively, and then be rewarded by the government granting you an apartment. That's a lovely basis for social organization.